This video lecture is over cryptography and encryption and a little bit of Ajax. We're going to walk through the exercise and show how things are created. And then you will be tasked with doing it on your own. So the exercise has several pages associated with it. We're going to start by looking at the database connection and get those files out of the way. Note that the way that the code is written for this example is done so that it complies with XHTML5 using that doctype tag and so on. So here are the instructions for doing that. What we're creating here, here's an example, finished solution. If we take a look at it, in this case what we would actually do first is go to create new login, and once we are here we will create our new login, and as soon as we type something, this Ajax is going to make a call back to the database and find out whether or not the username that you typed is available. Now it happens that the database is actually empty. If we go and check, this is the table that you're putting into your database, and there's nothing in it. So there's anything that I type there is actually going to be found, or rather not found. It'll be available. So I'll type my password. Admin account type can be anything. Just fill in the rest of the information so that we have a proper form to submit. And then click create new account. That PHP will insert a new record into the database. We come over here and let's come back to looking at this database once again. We're able to browse this table. We can see that the user ID I typed in there is displayed. This exercise is dealing with encryption, so you'll notice that the password has been encrypted. So anyone who gains access to the database will not gain access to any passwords. You'll also note that the email has been encrypted. So anyone who gains access to the database will not get user emails either. We come back here, and now we use our login and our password that we just created, which will bring you to a success page, and you will write out to the screen the password you encrypted using PHP's MD5 function is this, and it cannot be decrypted. Once it's a one-way encryption, so once you do it, it is forever encrypted. The email address we will encrypt using encrypt_encrypt, and it can be decrypted. It is a two-way encryption. It can be decrypted using encrypt_decrypt, and then you can just go back and try it again. So let's come back and look at what we have here. Here's a script that you'll use. You can just copy this. I've already created mine, but you can copy this, come over to your database, and if you don't have one existing there, come to your database, come to SQL, paste that query in here, hit go, and it will create this table for you, and it will be empty by default. Once you've done that, here's a set of login files. The login files consist of the forward-facing HTML pages and the open and close database files as well. And then the rest of this will walk you through creating the other pages. We're ignoring number 6 here. Number 6 is done in a separate video. And there are examples of the code as well. So from this point on, what I want to do is move to Dreamweaver. And let's look at the open and close database connection first. Those files were provided for you. Closed database connection you shouldn't have to do anything with. This is all the file consists of. It just closes the database connection. Open database connection looks like this when you get it. This is something you've used before. So simply put your login, your password, and your database instance, and save that, and make sure it's in your includes folder. Then let's come to the index page. The index page is one of them, one of the starter files. Make sure that session start is at the beginning. You've got your CSS in here formatting the page for you. And then in here we've got an error message, a div to contain an error message, so if anything goes wrong in the code, that error message can be displayed here. And this is similar to what we've done in other exercises, so we say if not empty session error message, then echo out the error message. We do that because if we do not use the empty function here, and it is empty, then we'll get an error message displayed on the screen, and that will not look nice for our end user. There's our link here to create a new login, and then down here is a piece of JavaScript to set the insertion point or the focus into that login box, that user ID box. So other than that, that's pretty much all we need to look at in that page. The next place that we go to is the new account page, following the same order that I went through in the browser. The new account page, very similar. Make sure that you have session start at the top. The CSS is there provided. You'll notice that there is some JavaScript on this page. We'll come back to that in a second. Here we've got the layout of all of these form elements. Notice right here we've got a list item, span ID equals username availability, class equals check ID, that's referring to the CSS, and there's some dummy stuff in there, but that doesn't matter. So you need to make sure this goes with the JavaScript, the Ajax that's going to function. So as a user types a user ID, when they navigate away from that box, right here this span with the ID of username availability, that is where the result gets placed, whether or not it's available for them to use. This is the same error message div that we saw a minute ago, and again we're setting the focus once again to that first form element. So what we really need for the rest of this page is the Ajax functionality. We start with these two script tags up above. One of them is calling an external JS file, which is going to be stored in your includes folder, which means that it will reside in the same location as OpenDBCon and ClosedDBCon. So we'll look at that. The second one is setting the onload event handler through JavaScript, and we're setting it equal to a function. And inside of that function it says get element by ID, user ID, and set the onChange event handler of the user ID down here. Here's get element by ID, user ID, that would be this input box. When it changes, call this function called check username availability. So every time that username box changes, call that function check username availability. So let's come to that JavaScript file, and you'll see we have an update username availability, a determine username availability, and a check username availability. So we have three functions in this JavaScript file. What you see in here is similar to what has appeared in other lecture material and in examples provided. So we've got a try-catch block, which we've talked about before. The try-catch block simply is a method of degrading gracefully in coding. It says try this piece of code, and if it doesn't work, then do something else. Rather than displaying an error message, continue to try other things, but whatever you do, don't display an error message unless you absolutely have to. That's the idea behind a try-catch block. So we try this, creating a new instance of the XML HTTP request. This works for Firefox. If that does not work, that means they're not using Firefox, so try This one, which is for some versions of IE, if that does not work, that means they're not using that browser. And then try this one, and if that does not work, then set request equal to false, which will produce an error message. I should say that this one up here works for more than Firefox, so it'll get us more browsers than just Firefox. So that's how we start off the file. And then we have the function that is called. Remember back here on new account, it says every time that user ID box changes, call check username availability. So we call check username availability. And what check username availability is doing is it is setting a variable username equal to the value of that user ID on this page. If we come back here, ID equals user ID. So that's what's happening here. So the value that was typed there is getting placed into this variable. And then we're setting a URL pointing to checkuserid.php, which is another file that we're going to look at here in a minute. Mode equals ask, and username equals the value that was typed in the form. If the username is greater than 0, that means they typed something. Then call this other function up above, and then open a request. We're using get because we have a query string. The query string here starts with a question mark followed by name equal value pairs, so we have get. The URL, which is this variable here, so that's the page that we're calling. And true means to send it asynchronously, which is what we want. We don't want a page refresh, we want it to do it behind the scenes, so that means we need true there for asynchronous. Every time the ready state changes, call this other function, determine username availability, and go ahead and send it. So now, we've started a round trip. We've sent something to the server, we're waiting to get it back. This one is the third one that actually executes. Let's go to determine username availability. Every time this is called, we're looking for the ready state of 4. The ready states go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 means that it's ready. Request.status is 200, which means OK. You're familiar with 401s and 500s, those type of browser errors. 200 means OK, so we're looking for 4 and 200 always. If we get those, then we want whatever was returned from the server, whatever was returned from checkuserid.php, stored into this variable. That's either going to be available or not available. And so, based on that, we're going to call update username availability with either available or not available. When we call update username availability, we're going to set the text of the element with ID username availability. We come back to new account. This span has an ID of username availability. Then we have document.get element by ID, that same span tag. This means display it. It was formerly hidden on the page. We're displaying it so that users can see it. And then we have a switch statement. If the status is available, then set the text, the inner HTML of that span tag, to be the username you entered is available. However, if the status is not available, provide a different message. If the status is blank, clear it out. Otherwise, put checking. And so that's how the Ajax functions. But that's not all of the Ajax. If you remember, down here in check username availability, we called checkuserid.php with a query string. If we come to that, this is a really short PHP, but we say mode equals, and we get the mode that was passed in, and then if it equals ask, then do the rest. That's just a method of keeping people from directly typing this URL. Set the username equal to the value that was passed in the query string. Open our database connection, which we already looked at. Create a SQL query, which we've done before. Concatenate into that SQL query this username. So user ID equals the username that was typed in the form field on the page. send it to MySQL, check to see if there is a result. In this case, it's going to be either 0 or 1. It's either going to find somebody or it's not going to find anybody. So if it's 0, set num records to 0, otherwise set this variable equal to what would be 1 in this case. Close the database connection, and then we either echo available or not available. Echo means write to the browser. Write it out so that if you loaded it in a web browser, you would see the word available. So we've got available or not available. So if we were to navigate to this page directly, check userid.php and type in if we come here and do check userid.php question mark mode equals ask ampersand username equals RJ Glotzbach, enter, we get not available because I already entered that in the database earlier in this demonstration. But if I change this to something slightly different, a different username, now it's available. So you can see how that PHP is functioning by itself. So what's happening is the Ajax is calling that PHP, and this PHP is checking and writing out one of those two values, and based on whether it's one of those two values, it either changes the inner HTML to the username you entered is available, or changes the inner HTML to the username you entered is already in use. So we come back and get this functionality once again. So that's the functionality you should get through Ajax. Once you've filled out that form though, once you have filled out this form and you click create new account, this is the lengthy PHP that we have for this assignment. So this is where our encryption takes place. We're shifting gears now, not doing Ajax. We're shifting gears to do encryption. So we've got our session variable once again. We're retrieving the values that were typed in the form. So we've got the user ID stored into a variable. We've got the posted password and the confirmed password, the two that we typed. We are immediately encrypting those using the MD5 function in PHP. And this is a flag, either true or false, that says whether or not the passwords match. So they typed two passwords. It's important to make sure they typed it twice correctly so that they will remember it later. This is to make sure that the form is actually filled out. All of these are the same thing, checking to see if each form element is empty with a bunch of logical ORs in between. If any of them are empty, it's going to redirect us back to that page with an error message, and it will display in that div that we looked at earlier. Assuming we get past that, we open the database connection and we check to see if the encrypted first password equals the encrypted second password. If that's the case, we begin our SQL. We write a select statement, concatenating on the user ID that they entered. We send that to MySQL. We check to see whether or not anything was returned. If nothing was returned, that means that the user does not exist in the database. Therefore, we can go ahead and insert them into the database. So that's, now that we're inside of this if, we're doing a different kind of encryption here. This is using the encrypt library, and encrypt has to be enabled in the php.ini file. So if you're using your own PHP setup, keep that in mind. You can look up a lot more about the encrypt library because there's a lot there. So this is a very short and easy way of doing encrypt and decrypt. In this case, we've got to set a size. We're using the Randall encryption algorithm, which is a 256-bit encryption algorithm. we create this key that we use for encryption, and we store that in the session so that we can use it later. The reason we store that in the session is when we get to the success page, we need that key to be able to decrypt it. So then we call encrypt_encrypt. We use the Ronald, that's pronounced Ronald, encryption algorithm. This is my unique key that I'm using, which we will also need again. This is the email that was typed into the page, the previous page, the mode that we're encrypting, and then this other key that was generated. After that, we're back to normal processing. So this is our new piece that we're learning here, encrypt_encrypt, using that library. Then we're just forming an insert statement. So insert into all of those columns, followed by these values, and we concatenate in user ID, password. This is our MD5 encrypted password. And then we get the posted variables for account type, name, address, city, state, zip, phone, and then we concatenate in the encrypted email as well. Send that to MySQL. Make sure that you display a message to the user. Set password match equal to true. That means that both of your encrypted passwords 1 and 2 matched each other. Come down here. These are some cases for if passwords did not match. We clean up the page a little bit. This function cleanup just empties all of our variables, and the last thing we do is redirect. So if the passwords match, we redirect back to index.php, which is our main login screen. So that brings us back here, where we can type our username and password and get logged in. So there's not much to this page. We've already looked at it. When you click submit, it takes you to login. Login is a page you've done before. Open the database, grab the username, but this time you grab the password that they typed and you immediately encrypt it using the MD5 encryption function and built into PHP. So that's how this is different from what you've done before. Encrypt that password, store it in here. From here on it's the same though. User ID equals what was typed and password equals the encrypted version of what was typed. Send it to MySQL. Check to see whether or not there was a result. Close the database and then do some cleanup. Assuming that login was successful, meaning they typed the correct username and password, in that case they'll go to success.php, otherwise they'll get redirected back to index.php. So our last page to look at, this is going to decrypt our email. Session start at the top. Check to make sure that they have logged in. So this is a security mechanism to make sure that they have logged in. They can't just type in the URL to this page. Echo out our XML declaration, open the database connection, select the user ID, password, and email from this table so that we can see what they are, where the user ID equals the login that was typed into the form field, which we stored into a session variable. Send that to MySQL. Check to make sure that there's a record returned. If there is a record returned, then go ahead and fetch that record. Get the password and the email, store them into local variables. And then the email variable, use encrypt_decrypt, use the same Ronald 256 encryption algorithm, use the same key that we typed on the previous page, grab the email that you pulled from the database, the same mode that was used on the other page, the same session ID key that was generated on the other page, and once you have done that, then we can write this out. And just in text down here we've got echo out the password, which is still encrypted, and then we've got echo out the email, which is now decrypted. And that finishes this exercise. So that was a rather quick walkthrough of this exercise. Again, coming through here, you'll create a new login. You've got some Ajax that works here for you. When you click submit, it will bring you back to the login page. You'll type your username and your password. It will bring you to this next page where your password is still encrypted because it's one-way encryption, and your email address is decrypted because it is two-way encryption, and we stored a key for that. And that concludes this video demonstration for cryptography, encryption, and some Ajax. And as I said, server variables is in a separate video demonstration.